So I'm trying in the 10 minutes that are given to me to give you a list of the problems that the report addresses and some further aspects of what we have been doing in the report, in addition to what Helmut already indicated. My remarks are divided in 3 parts. The first is the standards and defining features of a liberal democracy. The second is a brief review of the main challenges and problems we face currently. And third is a very selective review of some of the remedies that have been proposed in the debate that goes way beyond the report, but the report makes important contributions, I think, to the issues of resilience. How can we overcome these challenges and face the problems that we all know? First, what are the standards and defining features? As we all know, liberal democracy stands on 2 legs. One is the will of the people, popular preferences concerning policies, however it is measured, this will of the people. The other is the rule of law and the rule of a constitutional system. There are cases in history and in the present world where you have a strong rule of the will of the people, but a weakness of rule of law and constitution. These 2 elements come under the premise of and I think this is the core element of the possibility of the institutionally provided possibility of a fair opposition rights. Policies do not have a truth value. Therefore, they are essentially contested or potentially contested, at least. There is no TINA rule. There is no rule that there is no alternative. There is no alternative. As there is no alternative, only one alternative, or as alternatives are 1, democracy is 0. Democracy relies on alternatives, and these alternatives are represented by opposition. The second important element, in addition to fair rights of opposition, is adequate state capacity or governing capacity. There's a famous book by the name of Staatslehre by a not very widely read but worth reading theoretician of the early 30s of the 20th century, Hermann Heller, who spoke of, used the concept of Selbsteinwirkung, the acting of society upon itself through public policy and the state. And that is, could be translated as legitimate coercion. That is the key element. The state must be capable to exercise legitimate coercion on what goes wrong in society, according to some views about the collective good in opposition to others. The rule of the people, as democracy is often translated, implies at least a negative version, namely no one else but the people should be the dominant power in society. How do we illustrate this no one else? There should be no mafia, no dominant corporations, no financial markets, no international and supranational agents that interfere with the expression and implementation through legitimate coercion of public policies. It used to be the case that economies and societies were embedded in states, in a state organization. Today, we encounter the suspicion, quite often, and well-argued suspicion, that to the contrary, economies, states are embedded in economies. And that would be a clear indication, if that is true, that someone else than the people governs. Democracies have 5 characteristics, maybe more. I want to mention 5. Democracies are highly diverse. You have pointed out they are context contingent, and they come as unitary and federal, as parliamentary and presidential, and so on. I think the list once made up by Bo Rothstein has 16 design variables of the democracy. No democracy equals any other democracy. They are individuals in that sense. Second, democracies are, by their nature, and that is a very positive feature, reflexive, self-scrutinizing animals. They are open to ongoing institutional change and improvement, and that has to do with the aspect of resilience. That does not apply to authoritarian or theocratic or totalitarian regimes. Third, democracies are vulnerable. They are vulnerable to coups. They are vulnerable to the misuse of emergency provisions. They are vulnerable to foreign occupation, but they are also vulnerable, and that applies today, I think, in a strong sense, to a creeping process of decay. If you look at Turkey in recent, this is not a coup, it is a slow takeover, a corrosion of the key features. A fourth feature is that democracies so far, and that is an enormous challenge for us in Europe, are phenomena at the nation-state level. No one has really designed a supranational democracy. They are fixed to the nation-state and its territorial borders. And how to build a European democracy beyond nation-state is one of the challenges with which hundreds of academic and political experts struggle at the moment. And fifth and finally, democracy is rule, as Juan Linz has pointed out, pro tempore. It is time limited, not just space limited, it is time limited as well. And that means all decisions are up to, of almost all decisions are up to potential revision after the time period of an incumbent government comes to an end. What are the challenges and deficiencies? What is the malaise of contemporary democracies? I could talk about this for an hour, and I do try to do it in 3 minutes. The vastly documented and prominent phenomena is the popular distrust in political elites, which may have to do with deficient governing capacity or deficient capacity of elites to exercise legitimate coercion. They distrust, people distrust elites, politicians, parties, media, and that has led to the rise of anti-establishment populist movements and parties with a strong, as Jan-Werner Müller has pointed out, anti-pluralist and authoritarian potential. it also points this distrust to the weakness, and I think the ongoing and perhaps even increasing weakness of intermediary institutions, such as parties, associations, and the media. All the institutional patterns in which the two processes of democratic conflict resolution go on, namely the two, to quote Jon Elster, the two processes of arguing, such as in parliaments, and bargaining, such as between employers and employees, wage negotiations, and so on. Instead of arguing and bargaining, we have a widespread and often naively accepted cult of directness, direct democracy, direct decision-making, direct legislation, based on an alleged unity and authenticity of the people, which often engage against intermediary agencies and political elites in unfocused protest. And this reliance on the referenda, the worst case being the Turkish referendum recently, but not better is the Brexit referendum. The reliance on referenda instead of arguing and bargaining is one of the major malaise aspects. The governance report has two chapters on the United States, rightly so, and one of the authors, Ira Katznelson, speaks of democratic subversion in the name of security, emergency, the state of exception, the breaking of safeguards and rules that is necessary for the national interest, the securitization of public policy is a destructive force that is met in many countries. Further malaise is the decline in turnout and participation, the decline of governing capacity in the face of the financial market crisis and its economic consequences that we face in Europe and beyond. And also a destabilization and erosion of the party system. I mean, we in Germany are not aware of the exceptionalism of the German party system, where the center parties still win, taken together clear majorities in general elections. In most other countries of the EU, the music plays at the margins. And we have just seen a non-party winner of presidential elections and that, of course, has significantly to do with the, some argue, secular decline of the left of center parties, that is, social democratic parties in Europe and elsewhere. What are remedies? Third point. First, I should say that innovations can be for the better and for the worse. New phenomena are value neutral by themselves. They can also be ambivalent. We cannot say yet whether it's good for innovation for the better or for the worse. And Wolfgang Merkel makes a point concerning digital democracy. As far as Central East European and the new member states of the EU are concerned, the picture as drawn by Smilov in his very noteworthy contribution points out that developments are rather to the worse than to the better, and the contribution by Kuo confirms that for the developments in the United States. There are highly unwelcome novelties, restrictions of voter access in the US, gerrymandering, the obsolete pattern of the Electoral College in the United States, the absurd decision on Citizens United, and the practice of the incumbent president to refer to judges as so-called judges, denying the basic of the division of powers. These are tendencies, innovations that were thought impossible just a few years ago, and they are clearly dominant on the scene. Much better the perspectives in Latin America, which is described by Tami Pogrebici as a laboratory of democratic innovation, which, however, has difficulty to spill over to other places, as Helmut mentioned. Engaging citizens, increasing participation, these are all ongoing attempts through various mechanisms that I do not need to summarize here. I want to introduce an important, as I've tried in my contribution, an important distinction, namely the distinction between the expression of political preferences, which, according to many democratic reformers, should be maximized. More people should have more opportunities to participate in more decisions and so on. This is all good and well. However, we have also to look at the other side, namely not the expression, but the formation of political preferences through processes that various democratic theorists refer to as deliberation, education, information, building at the epistemic basis of democratic discourses, and eliminating alternative facts and so on. So the formation of preferences is something that is as least as possible as the opportunity to express. The role of movements is addressed by Donatella Della Porta. Movements, in my view, can help to solve one problem that has been stated early on in modern democratic theory by Robert Dahl, namely democracies measure preferences and the majority. They do not measure the intensity of these preferences held by people. And if they join movements, they can express intensities and not just numerical distributions. The key issue, I think, that all democratic theorists and all contributors in one way or the other come back to is the concept of representation. And that is less clear than many people assume. There can be no representation, as in direct democracies. There can be territorial representation through party competition. There can be functional representation through association and the bargaining between association. There can be statistical representation through mini-publics, which are a mirror image of the composition of the population, an idea that has been variously addressed. The technical term is sortition or randomized democracy, which makes sure that every single person and every category of person has the equal chance to be represented in the pool. There can also be disproportional representation, as in all second chambers. In the Senate, disproportional representation, sometimes combined with quotas, which is a very important kind of innovations. There can be second-best forms of supranational representation on the way to a supranational democracy in Europe. And there can be representation through fiduciary institutions, such as central banks, who are commissioned to serve the common good. However, they are politically independent, which has pluses and minuses as a consequence. Let me finish my remarks here. This is just an introduction and an invitation to the discussion. Thank you.